and welcome to our Lakeside chat. We are David Wofford and Katie Noonan, co-chairs of the Rotary Nature Center Friends. And we're so happy that you can join us tonight.
As we begin our program, it is important for us to acknowledge that we are on stolen land, that Lake Merritt is part of Ohlone territory. We hear now from Corinna Gould, spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lishawn and co-founder of Segurate Land Trust.
Good afternoon, relatives. My name is Corinna Gould. I am the spokesperson for the Confederated Villages of Lishawn. We are here today at what most folks think of as Lake Merritt. We are in the territory of Huichin. Huichin is actually a territory that encompasses 6 Bay Area cities: Oakland, Berkeley, Alameda, Emeryville, Albany, and Piedmont. And so this is a place that my ancestors have been since the beginning of time. And this was a place of abundance. I'm so happy that people from all walks of life that now come into our territory can enjoy this beautiful place that my ancestors have enjoyed since the beginning of time. My relationship to the land that I have been born to, raising my children and grandchildren here, has been to tell the story, the truth of what happened on this land before other people came here. I'm hoping that as we begin to learn these lessons of fires in California, the pandemic that's happening, that human beings come back to living in reciprocity with the earth.
Our topic tonight, marshes, connects both the land and the water and looks at their changing relationships. And as we start, we're going to share an event that we did as last Sunday, exploring some of the critters that live at the boundary between the water and the land.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Wofford, co-chair of the Rotary Nature Center Friends here at Lake Merritt's Wildlife Refuge. This morning we're out having a critter day, and which we do once a month or so. But today it's rather special. We've got some visitors from the Cal Academy of Sciences who are experts at identifying and studying the critters in California waters related to the bay, which, of course, Lake Merritt is connected to the bay. Behind me, we have some beautiful posters made by students from St. Paul's Episcopal School that have been working with us for several semesters now, and you can see their work and the things that they've been learning. So we're hoping that you enjoy your virtual visit with us today in our program, and we hope to see you down here at the Lake Merritt with us sometime soon.
You can pass that around and you could get a waiver sign to sign your...
Howdy, we are here at Lake Merritt with a few St. Paul students. Today is an exciting day to identify invertebrates. One of the things that we do in our class is actually identify some of these critters. Now, there are some posters and some students here that have made some beautiful posters to identify some arthropods, some worms, and Japanese bubble snail. What is it? Eliseo, I know that you did identify some sort of critter. What kind of critter did you identify?
I think it was the Harmothopoetra.
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah, scale worm. You're going for the scientific name. Very, very impressive. Olivia, what critter did you find in our lab?
I found the Japanese bubble snail, like the Heminoia japonica. I don't know.
Also very impressive, trying to do the scientific name. Beautiful artwork by Olivia. A lot of these species are native or non-native. What do you think?
Non-native.
What does that mean?
Well, it's not really from here.
That it's really muddy and gross, but you can see how like there's little holes. Imagine those holes are like in current and out current. And so, Hi, my name is Rebecca Johnson, and I co-direct the Center for Biodiversity and Community Science at the California Academy of Sciences. I'm also an invertebrate zoologist, which means I study animals without backbones. So things like, and my expertise is really in nudibranchs or sea slugs. But today we're out here at Lake Merritt in Oakland. It's an amazing spot. I haven't been here in a while, so I'm super happy to be here together with Katie and David and the crew from the Rotary Center Nature Center. because they do such an amazing job of engaging community in Oakland around this amazing natural place in Oakland. And, Lake Merritt, it's called a lake, but it's not really a lake. It's connected to the bay. So it has like a saltwater bay influence. And the animals and seaweeds that you find here are things that you would find in other parts of the bay, but it's also kind of unique. So there are really interesting things that we find here. Like today we found some bubble snails, found some nudibranchs, found some mussels and scale worms and anemones. And it's just really fun to discover what's underwater here in the heart of Oakland. Because I think many people, I'd say thousands and thousands of people run or spend time here with their families because it's super beautiful, but don't really think about the plants and animals that live under the water. And so that's what we're doing today, is pulling stuff up from under the lake and looking at what's there. Through our work at the Cal Academy, we get people together and give them the tools and opportunity to share nature observations that they make anytime. So we use an app called iNaturalist where people can take pictures, like wherever they are, of any plant or animal or living thing or evidence of a living thing, and upload it onto this app. And the cool thing is if you take a good picture, you don't have to know what you're looking at. And the app has some machine learning built in that will suggest identifications and help you learn about what you found. And then there's a community of naturalists online that will help confirm your identification or the identification that the machine suggested. And then those data, then your picture becomes data. And those data are shared with the rest of the iNaturalist community and with biodiversity scientists like me, so we can use those data to help answer questions about how the world is changing.
I don't think I've ever seen one out here when doing the dog fouling stuff. That's pretty cool.
Very cool.
I mean, as per usual, not the most elegant looking organism, but it's cool to see. So this is an oyster. And this is what you'd like to see in estuary systems. Hey everybody, my name's Damon Ty. I'm really excited to be here today because I have a naturalist that's lived around the lake for almost 2 decades. And anytime that we can get a bunch of people out here looking for stuff, that's where we all win. I mean, we win in seeing new organisms we definitely are seeing today, but really it's about getting people involved and having them see how much biodiversity is right here at Lake Merritt. So today we were pulling up some plates that Katie had put in the lake almost over a year ago, which for me, as somebody that's looked at stuff here forever, changed my perspective dramatically on how things function in a lake. So this first picture on the top left here is of the plate when it went in 1 year ago. Today, that plate is just full of stuff. We pulled it every couple months, and you could see stuff slowly accumulate. But then, when we pulled in December, it was just covered in these Sionas, these sea squirts, which was pretty amazing. I was like, whoa, how did all those get there? And then now if you look at it today, it is just covered in mussels and pounds of mussels. Like, I had a struggle to just pick the thing up because it's so heavy. This is all material that these organisms have accumulated out of the water in a very short period of time to build their shells with. So it tells you a lot about how much nutrients are kind of cycling in Lake Merritt. And the other cool thing is it just tells you how quickly life can regenerate someplace. Which I think is something that I couldn't even perceive about Lake Merritt until seeing the plates pulled today. And then the cool thing is having all these other people here, they're interested in seeing what is on there. And so as we dig through this, we're going to find a lot of stuff because we've got more eyes on it today, which is really, really helpful.
Yeah, we need to get it back in the water. They're getting off the ship.
Hello, I'm Amy Borges. I'm biology faculty at Laney College right behind us. Today I'm out here with some students as well as the Rotary Nature Center to show a few things about the lake. Like, besides the fact that it's not a lake, we like to look at the different kinds of wildlife that we see in the water, because sometimes we forget about all of the existence that happens that we don't see. It's also a really great opportunity for my students to see the connection between their community here in Oakland and the water and the wildlife, and look at the interconnectivity of all of the systems around us. Plus they get to meet other people and other biologists and use other kinds of apps. We use iNaturalist in my class. We come out at the lake and use an app to take pictures, to try to get ID work, as well as to see where different organisms are. And this is a chance for them to utilize that, get a little more experience, and talk to other biologists about what we're seeing out here. So it's always a good opportunity, and they always leave very excited to see what actual biology outside looks like, particularly right now when all of it's kind of online.
San Francisco Bay. Yeah, and this lake connects to the ocean. Yeah.
Wow, thank you.
So that was a very fun day, and I want to thank all of the people who came out. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you our featured guest tonight, Charlie Onorati from Save San Francisco Bay. Charlie is the education coordinator and has many hats on. I've known him for a number of years, a wonderful naturalist dedicated to making us all aware of the biology of the bay, but also what we can do to preserve this wonderful treasure that we have. So at this point, I'd like to welcome Charlie.
Thank you, Katie, for that nice introduction. And thanks to the Rotary Nature Center for inviting me out here today. Katie and I have been in communication for some time, and I'm excited that this is finally happening, that we get to do something in partnership together. So I'm going to share my screen now and get started with my presentation. Well, I'm happy to be here with you all and to be here with you, Lakeside, and chat about Save the Bay, my organization, and the work that we do. So I'll tell you a little bit about kind of the history of our organization, a little bit more than we've learned from the trivia game that we got to play at the beginning of today's program. And I'll tell you about things that we've done successfully and some challenges that we face, and also ways that you can get involved. So when we think about the bay, this is what we picture. Whether we live in the cities or can see the bay from our homes, if we're lucky enough to get to the shoreline and recreate or do some belly biology, we think of the bay as this beautiful resource that connects all of us, but it's not how it's always been. In the 1960s, the primary use, other than shipping, of the bay was to dispose sewage and garbage. In the afternoon breeze, you could smell untreated sewage. At night, you could see the bay on fire, where people would bring garbage to the shoreline and set it ablaze. With an average depth of only 14 feet, it was relatively easy at this time to create new shoreline and new land. And that bay fill was for ports and marinas, shopping malls and airports. And so in the 100 years leading up to 1960, an average of 4 square miles of the bay was filled every year. So that reduced it by 1/3. And as a result, the water quality in the bay had greatly degraded, and 84% of the Bay Area wetlands have been lost, as we learned also in our trivia session. And so in 1961, 60 years ago, we celebrated our anniversary this year. Our founders, Sylvia, Esther, and Kay, they started a grassroots campaign and created the San Francisco Bay Association. And they went door to door to raise money and took that money to Sacramento and lobbied to create the Bay Conservation and Development Commission. And that was the first institution whose sole purpose was to regulate the development of the bay. And so they worked tirelessly to protect the bay and to get people to think about it as a treasure as opposed to a landfill. Now, 60 years later, we are proud to continue their legacy. We work to shape the public agenda. We restore salt marsh habitat around the 9 counties. We promote Bay Smart decisions upland in our cities and towns. And we encourage Bay Area residents to celebrate the bay with us with Bay Day, which starts today, and I'll tell you more about that. So I mentioned that we've lost 84% of wetlands around the bay. And the San Francisco Estuary Institute reported that we need 100,000 acres of tidal marsh for the bay to be healthy. Since the year 2000, Save the Bay has been a leader in advocating for funding and restoration of wetlands. We learned about Measure AA in our trivia as well. This was on the ballot in 2016. The Restoration Authority passed this ballot measure, which provided funds to accelerate bay wetlands restoration. And it generated a $12 parcel tax per year that would generate about $500 million over the next 20 years. And this was passed by the 9 counties in the region by 70% of voters. And some of you might ask, why should my taxes support wetland restoration? It's a fair question. These are just some of the benefits that wetlands in general provide humans and wildlife. So they clean water. We talked about marshes and wetlands being the kidneys of the earth. They're also very important tools that we will need to utilize to meet the challenge of climate change. So they sequester lots of carbon, and they're also really important as buffers between the rising sea and our shoreline communities. Wetlands, including tidal marsh, are important habitat for many different species, and they're just beautiful open spaces that everyone should be able to enjoy. And of course, all of these benefits have impacts on our economy as well, which is important. So this is a picture of our restoration site at Eden Landing Ecological Reserve in Hayward and Union City. And you can see there's not much wildlife benefit to this space here. So our habitat restoration team, we restore tidal marsh. We focus on what's called the transition zone. And that is the zone that the ecotone, which is a term where the intertidal zone in the mudflats transitions to the upland habitats. So these are very different ecosystems with different plants and other ecosystem players. And so we focus on this transition between these two ecosystems because it's super important for habitat connectivity. The transition zone allows marsh creatures to move to different parts of the marsh in a safe way. It's also a refuge for species when there are high tide events, so they can be safe from the rising water and also continue to find food and shelter. And so this is a picture of the same site 6 years later. And you can see all of this habitat and you can see all of these benefits kind of in action in this photo. This is one of our most successful sites, and I'll get to how we measure success soon. And so the transition zone is super important for many different species. Specifically, we talked about the ridgeways rail and the salt marsh harvest mouse, both endangered species in the Bay Area. The salt marsh harvest mouse is endemic to this area, which means it only lives here. The ridgeways rail also lives in the marshlands down in Monterey area. And if you hold up your thumb, the salt marsh harvest mouse is as big as your thumb from nose to tail. So they're very tiny, they're very cute. And the work that we do protects them and gives them habitat. So the transition zone in the tidal marsh is important for these species, but it's also important for dozens of other mammals, hundreds of birds, and thousands of invertebrates, as we've seen from the video we just watched of students IDing kind of the benthic organisms in Lake Merritt. We also talked about wetlands and including tidal marshes being kidneys. So wetlands filter pollution. They filter the physical garbage. So as the tide rises, it brings with it the trash that makes it into our watershed. And that trash the physical garbage gets trapped by the plants, allowing us to remove it before it gets into the bay or the ocean. There are also microbial species that live in the soil that can break down harmful pollutants and chemicals that also get into the watershed. And so the wetland plants help to slow the flow of water from our cities and towns, giving time for these microbes to break down those harmful chemicals. Wetlands are very important in meeting the challenge of climate change. So coastal blue carbon stands for carbon sequestration, the removal of carbon from the atmosphere in ocean ecosystems or coastal ecosystems. And what that looks like in San Francisco is tidal marsh. That's a coastal ecosystem. And these wetlands, including tidal marsh, they sequester carbon, they take it out of the atmosphere. They also bury it into the soil at higher rates than forests. So they're really important in kind of reversing or combating the greenhouse gas effect. Another example of a coastal ecosystem that does really good carbon sequestration is mangrove forests. And I'm sure some of you have heard of those as well in the Everglades and other places in the world. Another impact of climate change is sea level rise. So this is a picture of the Embarcadero in San Francisco. And there are many places around the Bay Area that look like this. We call these hardscapes or hardened shorelines. So restoration is not possible in these places, and it's going to be really expensive to kind of maintain these spaces as the sea level rises, which we know it will. And the soil that marshes build up is very spongy and it can hold lots of water. So what these hardscapes do when we have rising tides or large winter storms, they really just move the water in other areas, causing floods in other spaces. Marshes give a place for the water to go. They can hold the water and they can control the flow. So they're really important in protecting our shoreline communities from flooding and specifically from sea level rise. So these are types of areas that are not ideal for restoration. It's impossible to restore this to what it used to be. The ideal places to do habitat restoration are these places that were historically tidal marsh in the past, like all of these agricultural fields up in the North Bay and salt ponds down the South Bay. So this is one of our large scale restoration projects that we've been working on for the last couple of years. And it's a seasonal wetland pond in this section of the farm on the east side of Belmarine Keys. And so we're using two strategies for this multi-acre project. For 3 years, we were collecting native seeds up in the North Bay, in Sonoma County and Solano County, and cleaning off the seeds. And at the end, we had around 700 pounds of native seeds, and that was scattered throughout the site. We also grew native rhizomatous plants in these raised beds that you can see here. And a rhizome is a modified stem. It grows underground. And so what happens is these rhizomes spread out, and then they can shoot up new stems as they spread out. And the idea is these rhizomes are very resilient. And so you can bury them underground and they'll start spreading, and hopefully they will keep invasive and non-native species from establishing in the restoration site. We grow native grasses, native rush, and also this, I think, is ambrosia, as well as mugwort and other species. And I'll show you some pictures of those as well. So this is what the Belmarine Keys seasonal wetland pond looked like last winter. And this is what it looked like just a month and a half ago. So you could see all these beautiful yellow flowers. This is from our seed mix. You can see some of the rushes and the grasses coming up here. So fairly successful. Hopefully the drought doesn't do too much damage, and fingers crossed for rain this winter. Because this winter we are working on another large-scale restoration project down in the South Bay. So the South Bay has a lot of salt ponds. These are areas up on the shoreline that were diked off from the flow of the tides and left to dry out, and they were used to create salt and sell salt, commercial salt production. So now these areas are great places that we can restore back to tidal marsh, what they were historically. So this is Bedwell Bayfront Park, if you're familiar with the South Bay. Facebook and Amazon have their offices somewhere over here. So we are working to restore this horizontal levee here. And a horizontal levee is a levee that has a very low gradient, so it rises very slowly. And that's so that we can plant a really healthy, large transition zone and plan for where the ocean, where the level of the bay will be, 50 years from now. And we used similar strategies for this project. We've been collecting seeds all over the South Bay, and we grew also rhizomatous plants here. So Some of the plants are creeping wild rye, bulrush, ambrosia, mugwort, marsh baccharis, western goldenrod, and these are all rhizomatous plants that like to grow next to each other and together. You can also see a gigantic lupin bush here. It's right here next to Rachel as well. This was a volunteer. It wasn't supposed to be there, but it was really happy, and so it kind of blew up. It's huge. It's like our mascot. So this is what the site looks like now. So this is what was Salt Pond, and eventually the levee will be broken out here by the bay, and this will all fill with water. And then our transition zone horizontal levee is going to be around this corner. So we're really hoping for a good amount of rain this year, so that when we put our plants in the ground, they have a better chance of surviving and establishing. One question we always get is, how do you measure success? So every year we monitor our restoration sites, and that means we go through the site and we systematically ID all of the different plants that we find. We take data about non-native cover and native plant cover, and we also measure the height of plants. And so all of this gives us an idea of what the biodiversity is like in our restoration sites, and also the habitat structure. Ideally, you want a habitat structure with like low-lying plants, big tall bushes, and everything in between. So I wanted to give you all a chance, and you can type in the chat. I don't have shirts to give away, but I still would appreciate your participation. This is a quadrat. This is a 1 meter by 1 meter square that we use in our monitoring season. So if you had to guess what percentage of this square is taken up by native plants, by living plants, we count all plants together. If you had to guess what percentage of this square was taken up by living plant material, what would be your guess? Let me know in the chat. See, 50%, 15%. %78% has been the closest. So 70% of this quadrat is taken up by plant material. And 30% then is dead plants or bare earth. And so the data that we get from monitoring helps us plan what we're going to do restoration-wise in the site in the future. So in this area, we might decide to plant more Frankenia, alkali heath, as you can see here and here, in these kind of open spaces. So we want high native plant cover and high diversity of habitat structure. So let's talk about progress. Since the report given by the San Francisco Estuary Institute in the late 90s, 13 acres of wetlands have been restored. 13,000 acres have been restored. 25,000 have been acquired and have restoration plans in place. So that means that we still need to acquire and restore 22,000 acres. Relative to other major estuaries in the country, like Chesapeake Bay or Puget Sound, the EPA provides little funding for restoration, habitat restoration, and environmental quality in the Bay Area. This has since changed with the passing of the San Francisco Bay Restoration Act, HR 610, which was led by Representative Jackie Spear, who we worked with in partnership, and that authorizes $125 million over the next 5 years for habitat restoration and pollution prevention. And this is great because we need state and federal funding if we want to reach our goal of 100,000 acres of restored tidal marsh. So quickly, in the couple of minutes that I have left, I want to tell you how you can get involved. We do a lot of work around the Bay Area, and that would not be possible if we didn't have help from volunteers. So in a normal year, we would run about 200 volunteer programs. We would engage 5,000 people, 2,000 students. We grow and put 35 to 50,000 plants in the ground every year. And we really rely on our volunteers to help us with that work. Unfortunately, for reasons we're all familiar with at this point, that has not been possible for us. So we really miss the time that we get to spend with volunteers in the field. And we hope to be able to do that as soon as it's safe. And when it is safe, you'll be able to go to our website and click on the volunteer button in the top right, and you'll be taken to our public program calendar, and you can see what events are coming up. Another way to get involved, if you are part of a school community or another community group, you can sign up for an outdoor education program that we call Bay Discovery. This program provides teachers and coordinators with service learning opportunities that connect the students to, it connects next generation science standards to the Bay itself. So it's local examples of what students are learning in class. Students get to dig in with us and join staff in doing restoration activities, picking up trash, planting, watering, everything in between. So we also offer this program to community groups, faith-based groups, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and other groups like that. In 2016, we realized that one of the greatest hurdles for teachers and their students and school communities, one of the biggest hurdles getting them out to our sites was being able to afford transportation. A lot of our sites are fairly remote, and so usually classrooms have to buy bus service, and that can be really expensive. So we were awarded a grant that reimbursed teachers for the transportation payment. We have lost that grant since, but now we budget every year to be able to reimburse teachers and schools for bus payment. And so our goal is that no child is left inside. We want every student in the Bay Area to have the opportunity for outdoor education and environmental education. Last year was different for everyone, right? We all had to pivot in our lives professionally in many ways. So all of the time that we would have dedicated to these education programs, we aimed at creating videos and lessons and activities that families and teachers and students can find on our education portal. So it's called OLO, Outdoor Learning Online, and I encourage you to check it out, savesfbay.org/OLO. And there are fun videos to watch with accompanying activities that just encourage people to get outside and explore and engage with nature. We also created virtual programs. You can see Rachel here with our gimbal, which is like a steady cam for your phone. And we do Zoom field trips. We're currently doing them now, where we bring people into the shoreline with us and they get to explore and ask questions and do activities. Finally, another way that you can get involved with us is by celebrating with us. Today is the first day of Bay Month. This is an evolution of Bay Day, which is the first Saturday of October. And now it has become a virtual month-long celebration. And if you'd like to participate, you could sign up at bayday.org, and that you can sign up to do the Bay Day Trail Challenge. There's 2 ways to complete. You can do 25 miles of the Bay Trail, of which I believe there's like 500 miles of Bay Trail. It's the San Francisco Bay Trail around the entire bay. If that's not accessible to you, you can also do 5 activities that come from our OLO page that just get you to the shoreline or to nature near you to engage with the outdoor world and explore. Everyone who completes the challenge is entered to win a grand prize of $300 to REI and a 1-year subscription to All Trails. And 10 runners-up will receive a 1-year membership to All Trails and some swag from them. So we have 4 calls to action. Dig in. Once it's safe, please come volunteer with us. I gave the link to Katie, but you can find voting information on our Action Fund website, Save the Bay Action Fund, and find out what measures we support and which ones we oppose. If you can, please donate to help us keep doing the important work that we're doing. And of course, celebrate with us this Bay month. Go to bayday.org and sign up, walk around the Bay, and maybe win a grand prize. We've come a long way in 60 years, and we are going to continue to fight for the Bay, fight for clean water, fight against inappropriate development, and hopefully reduce the amount of trash going into the Bay. Thank you all so much for listening, and I'm going to pass it back to you, Katie.
Thank you so much. Unmute myself. Okay. Yes, thank you so much, Charlie. That was a rich presentation. which is very exciting. Even though we are limited in how much we can congregate, there's all that vast shoreline and all those helpful activities that we can do in addition to educating ourselves. So it's very exciting. So at this point, this would be a good time to take a couple of questions. So we have a question here. Someone said, can you say something about sea level rise and what's predicted?
Yeah, thank you, Leanne, for that question. The San Francisco Estuary Institute and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Atmospheric Association, those they worked together on a project called ART, which is adapting to rising tides. I'll put the link. I'll put the link in the chat box. Obviously, sea level rise is going to be different around the bay for geographical reasons. It's going to have different effects for social justice reasons and others. But the Adapting to Rising Tides project has an interactive map where you can look at different places along the shoreline and different scenarios of sea level rise, and also include king tides and other scenarios, and see what sea level rise would look like and how it would impact different parts of the shoreline. I'm going to find that right now. Tony, your hand is raised.
They just asked the same question in chat. Carl did, but I was just saying, Save the Bay involved in any projects around Lake Merritt as far as restoring the shorelines around there, or can you envision that in the future?
Yeah, so I know that Katie and the Rotary Nature Center friends are working on a kind of like demonstration tidal marsh restoration project on the lake. We have a partnership with East Bay Regional Parks District, and we have a native plant nursery on the Martin Luther King Jr. Regional Shoreline, so that's the closest project that we have to that area. We've been working there for a long time, and so we've worked at different parts of the Martin Luther King Jr. Shoreline. Arrowhead Marsh, if you're familiar, is where we've worked in the past, like 10 years ago now, I think. So that's as close as we are to Lake Merritt, but this is another thing that Katie and I have been talking about for a long time. So maybe in the future there will be something more immediately local, some work that we're doing with the Rotary Nature Center friends.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Naomi put a great link there for the marsh restoration west of Brooklyn Basin. So there's a link there if people want to get a screenshot. Thank you, Naomi.
Okay, thanks so much. Well, while we continue thinking about this, I'd like to introduce our next segment here. We are going to be able to see Joel Peter, who was the Measure DD project manager for many of the projects, for the whole project of Lake Merritt Improvement, but it had a special attachment and connection to the tidal marsh restoration at 12th Street. And so we're going to take a look at his experience and some of the things that he has to show us at that marsh.
My name is Joel Peter. I'm a retired program manager for the Measure DD bond program at the City of Oakland. Measure DD was a $198 million bond program that funded a variety of projects around the City of Oakland. Lots of park projects, open space preservation, restoring historic buildings all across the city, new recreation center, and a lot of work here at Lake Merritt, which is a saltwater estuary in the middle of the City of Oakland. Right now we're standing on the Lake Merritt Channel Tidal Marsh, and that's an area that was created from what was originally an underused park adjacent to the Lake Merritt Channel. This channel goes down and connects Lake Merritt to the estuary and San Francisco Bay. Most people don't realize that Lake Merritt is actually tidal. Water flows in and out twice a day with the tides, and it's a brackish water tidal slough. This time of year in the autumn, the rainfall is at its minimum. We've had a long dry spell, and freshwater input into the lake is at a minimum. So the water right here next to us is pretty much just as salty as San Francisco Bay. In the wintertime, you get a lot more fresh water, and that way you get this mixing of fresh and salt, and there are plants that are particularly adapted to that, and you'll find these here. So what was here before? Back in the old days, this was a 1/4 mile wide tidal slough, narrowed down a little bit as it came into this area, but it was still all the way over to where the Oakland Museum is now. And Lake Merritt was mostly mudflat at low tide. There was the constant ebb and flow of the tides. There's a lot of wildlife, a lot of birds, and as humans entered into the scene, they began constricting the lake and the channel here, filling in more and more every year over 100 years, adding the city and pushing this into a very restricted waterway. That choked the flow that goes in and out of Lake Merritt, which had impacts on water quality, wildlife, and so on. As part of Measure DD, we wanted to restore some of the natural attributes of the lake a bit more like it used to be. So one of the plans is to open this channel wider, take out restrictive culverts that we had at 10th Street and at 12th Street that really choked the flow down, and in that way double the flow in and out of the lake. We now have a clear span bridge you can see there with a 100-foot wide channel, and the flow is much better than it used to be. Now the other part that came up during the design process, one of our sub-consultants, Philip Williams and Associates, came up with this idea of taking the parkland that was right here. It was about 10 feet higher than you see it now. It was an underused lawn area. There was a single basketball hoop, and only one person I ever saw ever used it. It was separated from the lake by a 12-lane expressway. So the idea was to reduce the expressway and open this up, make it more friendly, connect from Lake Merritt with pathways that would run down to San Francisco Bay and connect to the Bay Trail. But this area right here, Philip Williams came up with the idea that we had enough room, we could actually excavate down to sea level and remove that underused lawn and have a tidal marsh habitat here. And that was, I thought, just a brilliant idea. So we really went for that. We spent money from the City of Oakland's bond measure, and Coastal Conservancy added money to the mix, and we were able to excavate this down, very carefully grade at a very gentle slope, and it's designed so that as the tide comes up and down, this gets periodically inundated, and then the water recedes again. We planted then particular salt marsh plants. The pickleweed you see here is one of the primary plants. It's a succulent sort of a plant. It's actually edible. You'll see in some fine restaurants they usually call it sea asparagus or other names. The pickleweed, it's got a crunchy, salty flavor, and we found the birds like to graze on it, as well as it provides shelter for birds and some other creatures as well. So pickleweed can take inundation. It tends to grow in the lower part of the tidal marsh, so it can take more inundation than other plants. So we've spread this out. We originally had it planted in the upper area, and then we did experiments using student volunteers and other volunteers, putting these cages further and further down, closer to the edge, planting the pickleweed and seeing where it grows. And we found we can get it all the way down to the edge of the marsh, as you can see over in that area over there. Well, you brought the students out from Oakland High.
I did.
and they were instrumental in establishing these cages that we put here, doing lots of planting. They did all the monitoring. We've discovered through their records that we had an 80% survival rate once we put the cages up, which is really excellent for a marsh planting in a bare zone like this, particularly with all the Canada geese that we have at Lake Merritt that are always trying to eat what we do. The cages are in place to protect the young plants from grazing. Primarily Canada geese and American coots graze on the pickleweed and the other plants we were putting in. We found the best type is this one here. It's about 3 feet tall, wire fencing, 8 feet in diameter. It's small enough in diameter that a goose cannot fly into it. They need a long landing zone. So we scattered these around, and the pickleweed thrived. The pickleweed then generated seed and spread seed all around the area. So it sort of got a snowball rolling, and plants come up in between the cages. We then added more fencing between the cages, and after about 5 years we were able to remove all the cages from the area up here because it had grown in so thick and well that it could withstand the grazing. So we're now, we've been adding cages further down, adding more fencing in between as the little seedlings come up, and we hope to be able to remove those cages eventually and have this entire marsh from the toe of the slope all the way to the channel edge thickly vegetated. The other plants that we've put in are in the higher reaches of the tidal zone. They get inundated for shorter periods of time. We have saltgrass, we have Frankinia, we have Jaumea. These are all plants that are adapted to salty soils and occasional inundation, and they sort of weave together into a net. You'll find that on the as you progress downward in elevation, you'll see each of the plants where they like to grow. Up higher, you'll even see salt bush, marsh gum plant, things like that that can tolerate salt but really can't tolerate inundation. And further down, you get into the saltgrass and the Jaumea, and then finally we get down into the pickleweed at the lowest levels. So it's interesting to see how very small changes in water elevation affect plant life, each one adapted to its particular elevation and spot on the tidal marsh. One of the interesting things about this marsh is we also have some freshwater input. Up there you see a grove of willow trees. We have actually a spring coming out of the hillside up there that brings fresh water down and into the marsh. And that way we actually found we could plant freshwater plants, freshwater marsh plants. You'll find cattails up there and willows and other plants like that that just love to have their feet wet all the time. And then the blend, as the fresh water seeps down into the marsh, interacts with the incoming saltier water, and you get these different zones. Makes it particularly interesting as a marsh habitat. So the original idea was to have habitat for wildlife, habitat for tidal plants, also act as a filter for stormwater that's running out of the urban area. We've got a stormwater outfall right over here. Water comes off the parking lot that's up there, carrying, of course, all the little oils that drop out of automobiles and trash and things that are usually found in a parking lot. Originally, that just dumped directly into the channel. Now it actually comes out, goes through a little ditch, and winds its way and being filtered by the marsh itself before it gets into the water and contaminates the bay and the lake. So that was another reason that Philip Williams came up with this idea, acting both as habitat, as filter, and then finally as an educational resource. We have Laney College just downstream. Their biology classes and geography classes use the marsh as a teaching tool. And Oakland High School has had classes out here. So this is a piece of a tidal marsh that you don't see anywhere else in Oakland. People can bring their students out here and learn about these habitats that were previously not available as a resource for educators. So it's actually got a pretty good multi-benefit use for this project. The sea level rise will affect Lake Merritt and the channel, as it does all of the areas that are subject to the tides. We have a tide control station at 7th Street, which is 3 blocks downstream. They have tide gates that they can close when excessively high tides come in. So for the present time, we will rely on that. Eventually, if it ever gets overtopped, that won't be able to protect the lake. But for the time being, the tide gates actually have an artificial means of protecting both the marsh and the lake. You'll find around the bay, as the tides go up over time, these marshlands will have to retreat inland. The areas that are now covered by pickleweed will be inundated far too much, too deeply, and too often for those plants to survive. So you'll probably see the pickleweed migrating upward, and ahead of it will be the jaumea and the saltgrass and so on, until it runs into a steep bank like this, which is typically what you find around San Francisco Bay. So the marshes will get compressed, and that's one of the effects of global climate change, will be the reduction of the marshland around San Francisco Bay.
Thank you, Joel. I would like to turn now to the section of Lake Merritt that Rotary Nature Center Friends has begun to work in as an adopt-a spot.
Well, that's just the map from 1856?
I think so, yeah.
That shows the original marsh. My name is Reed Dillingham. I'm a landscape architect, and I and my office worked on the restoration of the shore near the Sailboat House, between the Junior Center on the north and the end of the Sailboat House on the south. And it was a long process. We started, I think, in maybe the summer of 2011, might have been even earlier than that. And there were a lot of discussions. There was early studies of designs. One of the things that was an early thought was to have a marsh with a boardwalk. And that got taken out of the project at some point, maybe because of cost. I think in actuality it was a great thing not to have done that, because it kind of gives the marsh its own due without covering over a lot of it with the boardwalk. But one of the questions that we have to think about when we're talking about the marsh and so-called natural areas is what is nature really? You know, are we talking about nature before humans were here at all? Are we talking about it when native Californians were here, or when people from Europe came? There's a lot of different standards there. Even the Native Americans modified the landscape significantly through burning and through favoring certain kinds of plants for crop use, etc. So this is really an approximation of what might have been natural originally. So we've used native plants, which we find in other areas of the state, and we try to regenerate those to create what is the appearance of a natural landscape, or in this case, a marsh. Whether this is accurate as to what would have been here when people first settled in Oakland in the 1850s or not, I can't be sure. We don't know. We do have some old photographs, I think from later on in the 19th century, but maybe not in the as early as 1850s. Photography was not widely available at that time. So what we have here is an approximation of a natural system that we've initiated, and hopefully it will be self-sustaining. But we've had to make certain adjustments, such as some irrigation, for example, to maintain that natural system. Which would not have been necessary originally, but may be necessary now. So each of these areas, when I say each, I mean the two marsh areas here, are a bit of an experiment to see what we can do, how we can support them, how we can recreate them. They are, in some ways, a display of what nature might have been. So this area was set up mostly for classes. So if you look at it, there's a couple of sort of circles here of stones where a teacher could set up and have students sit on the stones. And then of course we have a stone edge beyond that, which is easier for students then to be able to get water samples from the lake. They don't have to get their feet muddy and so on. Well, this is the other marsh that was done at the same time that the first one was that we looked at, the larger one. And it's a good example of what we can expect the other one to probably eventually develop into. So we have a nice hierarchy of plants, you know, going from the lakeside up through the mud, through the lower plants, the pickleweed and so on, up into the native plants at the edge. I think this kind of expresses the hope that we had for the marsh, that it really at least creates the appearance of a natural marsh. It may not be entirely natural, but it gives you that sense of it. And so that's good.
So I wanted to share with you that this project was a Project of the Year, got a design award, and it's our Adopt-A-Spot at Lake Merritt, where we are working with Public Works and with many of the people listed there to steward the particular area. But Charlie, the Save the Bay's curriculum, bringing kids and people out to take care of marshlands and wildlands in their areas is the model. You know, always it's been an inspiration to see what Save the Bay has offered, and we're really excited about what we have here in Oakland to offer to people in the same vein. So I think we're close to out of time. And Charlie, you said you could stay after for a couple minutes for questions.
Yeah.
And if that's so, I'm going to share my screen really quickly to give the last a little bit of information at the end, if I can.
And Katie, Reed is here also. Maybe he could answer some questions.
Fantastic, Reed. I'm so happy to see that you made it. So I wanted to remind everybody about what is coming up. We have a cleanup day collaborating with Mud Lab on October 8th, and it's a lot of fun to do that. The Autumn Lights Festival is coming up in the Garden Center from October 14th to 16th. Definitely something to put on your calendar. We're going to have an official Adopt-A-Spot Bay Day at the Rotary Nature Center grounds and the Sailboat House Marsh on October 15th. That's our third Saturday cleanup time. And then moving forward into November, we've got a very interesting, I think, topic. We're going to look into taxidermy and how it's, we have two people. We have Jim Covell, who learned taxidermy as a child at Lake Merritt with his father, Paul Covell, and also going to have Alicia Good, exhibit preparator and the taxidermist at the Open Museum. It's going to talk about taxidermy in the 21st century and the 20th century. So that should be fun. We want to thank Rob Lamone, our producer, for our program tonight, the Lakeside Institute, San Francisco Elks Lodge, our Nature Center friends, staff, and people, David, my co-chair, and other people who have been involved in all aspects of putting this together. Other partners and collaborators have been working with us over the past 2 years that we've been working. Our volunteers. We want to especially recognize the Frederick E. Howard Foundation for Educational Opportunity. It's helping us to bring the programs to you and more. Finally, to pause on our mission, the Rotary Nature Center Friends is a community group advocating for the Rotary Nature Center in Lakeside Park, delivering interpretive nature and science programs, and being a steward of the wildlife refuge. And so I think I'm going to stop at this point and stop sharing. And those of you who need to leave now, we're really happy that you were able to come to our program tonight. And so now, if you'd like to ask questions, we have Reed Dillingham, landscape architect for the Sailboat House Shoreline, and Charlie Onorati from Save the Bay. So we have some questions. Let's see. I can't see all of them, but
Katie, while you're getting the questions together,
yes,
could I thank our two guests?
sure.
Well, I want to thank Reed and Charlie because I've been working with Katie and others and going down to Lake Merritt there for several years now, and I've often wondered exactly what we were doing, what I was doing there. And now, thanks to your presentations and talks, I understand a lot better.
It really is beautiful. I mean, it's, just, the cooler weather, a little bit of water, and it's really looking beautiful. People, I've noticed people going out to look at it, enjoy it, look around at what's living there. It's really a great addition to the park. So, let's see. So Charlie, I was wondering if you had noticed any wildlife benefits at some of your major restoration areas that it's so beautiful now.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to point out that Shanti had their hand raised, yeah, okay, there it is again.
Let's go to Shanti. Go ahead. Shanti, can you unmute yourself? Oh, let's see.
Or type in the chat.
I'm asking her.
Oh, okay, now I can.
Great.
Oh, nice.
Okay, I'm going into philanthropy in some ways, and so I'm very interested in funding things like the work that you all do that helps everybody. So I'm just wondering, for example, if Facebook has given you funds for what you're doing down near them, and do you have a fundraiser or someone I could speak with your organization?
Yeah, we have a whole development team. Who are dedicated to bringing in individual donations, institutional donations like Facebook. We have a grant writing team. So we have a bunch of different ways that we try to raise money to reach our mission. Facebook is actually a title sponsor, as well as IBM Bay Area of Bay Day this year. And so companies like those and others, we will also do restoration programs with them. So kind of as a thank you for the donation, we bring them out to the shoreline and let them do the work with their hands that their companies are supporting.
Fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good luck and keep going.
Thank you. Katie, you asked about wildlife. I listened to a very interesting podcast, and I've read a couple of articles just all about how the pandemic and the shelter-in-place order has affected wildlife and their behavior. So we were in June of 2020. Our work was deemed essential, so we got to go back out into our sites, and we did see a huge difference with the reduced amount of traffic and noise pollution. Songbirds were everywhere and singing more, and so that was just one example that I saw. I also at that time lived near the Presidio, and the coyotes were all over the place, just because people weren't out and about. So it was an interesting year for wildlife, and it gave us a glimpse of what life could be like with less traffic on the road and people working from home. Kind of like an example of a better world in that sense.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've heard about that too. That when people are not there, wildlife has been able to use the habitat much more fully, and that's pretty cool. So let's see. I did a wonderful program with Save the Bay, in which was called it was called the BEST program, where there were where older students were able to help younger students with planting and learning about different plants and so forth. Are you planning to try to build that back up again once the pandemic kind of lets loose of things and people are able to get together?
Yeah, this is like a time of transition. So we've had a lot of education programs that have come and gone. One that I wish I was around for was Canoes and Sloughs, where we would actually take students out into the marsh in canoes. So yeah, I mean, I could definitely see this kind of mentorship program would be super beneficial, both for older students as mentors teaching environmental education, and younger students seeing their older counterparts, you know, doing good for the planet and taking action on things like climate change. There's another question in the chat box that I want to answer, and also make space for Reed if you want to answer it too. Our policy team put out an initiative a few years back called Basemark Communities, and it is a way for cities to grow and develop sustainably. And so it pushes for bicycle infrastructure, affordable housing near public transit is a huge part of Basemark Communities initiative, which would take many single occupancy vehicles off the road. You know, investing in public transit is huge as well. Those are just some ways that we can keep cars off the road. And I hear you about how traffic has gotten as bad, if not worse, than it was before the pandemic. I feel like that's definitely true. But yeah, I encourage you to look at our Basemark Communities initiative on our website. And David, you have a question?
Yes. During the program this evening, we looked at two and talked about a third, different locations right on Oakland's Lake Merritt, two of them in the channel, the two identified marsh restoral projects. The first one where we saw the earlier photo before and after and how green it is, and where they have the cages and the pickleweed. And then the second one where Katie and I now have the adopted spot and that Reed designed. Naomi Schiff mentioned a third one, which is just through the estuary and around to the left a bit there. Question is there, how significant is it to sit back and look at the three of those and what happens and what's going on over there as a unit, or is that not really relevant, that they're each more standalone? In other words, would it be super beneficial? Is that something that's already going to happen, or?
I think one of the things that touches on is habitat connectivity, which is what I mentioned before. So making sure that wildlife can move around to different parts. It helps with gene flow. It helps with being able to find resources in different areas. So I think it is important that those three locations are near each other and kind of separate at the same time. And I'm not sure if that answers your question, but
neither am I. I should say that there's a fourth one. A fourth one in the planning, right, just straight out at the end of the estuary, where they got the rowing club, and there's going to be another restoral project, I understand.
I might jump in here for just a minute and say, one of the things that's surprising to me is how individual each location is. So when we look at the two marsh areas near the Sailboat house, they're very close together. and yet one has been easier to establish, marsh plantings, and the other one has been more difficult. The various conditions are really complicated as to why some places work and some places don't, or some places are easy to adapt and others are much slower. After I met Katie and Rob out at the Sailboat House the other day, I was looking back through some of the documents, and one of the things that the hydrologist mentioned was that for establishing pickleweed, it isn't the elevation that the plants are at. It's the amount of time that they're inundated with water or salt water. And that seems like it would be the same thing as the elevation, but it's not quite. So it's a very subtle thing. And of course, then you also have the interaction of wildlife and so on. It's a very subtle and an almost mysterious kind of thing as to why it works in some places and it doesn't work as easily in other places. It's kind of a mystery. Or maybe I'm just not smart enough. Who knows?
I think you have a lot of insights into what might, and you're very open about what might be happening on those sites. When we were walking around, we saw pickleweed where we hadn't expected it would grow. We saw clumps. We saw flowering pickleweed. It was something that I hadn't noticed either for a while. I wondered if you would comment on you mentioned that you had the classroom area. What kinds of things did you plan for in terms of human interaction? And we've heard so many things about the overpopulation of Lakeside Park, etc. Did you see anything that was of great concern in the marsh when we visited it?
Are you asking me or?
No, I'm asking you, Reed.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, wasn't clear.
Oh, sorry.
So the question was, did I see anything that was what?
Well, when you put together the marsh, did you think about how humans were going to be coming by all the time? And now during the pandemic, we've had a lot more human beings coming by all the time. Did you see any particular impacts, or did you feel like the way that you designed it made it so that it actually worked pretty well with the people coming by?
Well, I mean, what you really want to do is keep people out of there. And so the most important thing is the fence. Mm-hmm. I've done a few projects with the Presidio Trust over in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. And I really admire the fences. Robert Frost said, good fences make good neighbors. Well, good fences also make good habitat. You just keep people out, let them look, but not get in there. So that's a kind of a key issue. Of course, if you have a huge area, that's not a big deal. But in a small area like at the Sailboat House, it's really critical. And for the most part, I'm surprised people have generally stayed out of those areas. And that's been great. I'm sort of pleasantly surprised by that. I thought there would be a lot more trespassing.
And Katie, if I could just piggyback on what Reed said, another interesting thing that came out of Shelter in Place was we saw some of our restoration sites that we have a lot of foot traffic in. We saw them do better actually because there was less disturbance. So even places that we want people to be in and we want people to explore, they need a break from people's feet. And so it was interesting to go back out to our sites and see some plants doing a little bit better, having not been so disturbed.
And these sure look beautiful. So, I mean, certainly something to be proud of, and we still have a few thousand acres to continue to restore in the bay. That's really, really impressive, and it's really fun to go out there and do that kind of work. Do we have more questions that people would like to ask?
It looks like Naomi has a question.
Hey, go for it, Naomi.
Yes, I just through the comment that Charlie just made. You know, in Central Park in New York, sometimes they fence off a bunch of grass to let it recover, and I do wonder whether once we're not COVIDing, if that should happen, uh, it might be something to think about for our limited marsh areas where there is traffic, to give them rest at sometimes and and I almost think that that time of year is the late summer, when things are so dry, and the plants are kind of stressed out anyhow. So I don't know. It was an interesting thing. I haven't thought about that before, but I'm going to think about it now. Thank you.